The Easter Sunday Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by P.Q. Ribber. I came of age in the 1970s and 80s when conformity was strictly enforced in my family. When I was old enough, I finally rebelled, making decisions that literally led to my meeting with the real-life Dogman. When I was a kid, my mom was extremely superstitious about going to church on major holidays. If you didn't make an appearance at Christmas and Easter, surely you were destined for the fiery pits below. By the time I was 19, it was the early 80s, and she had become even more religious. This was the Reagan era, a return to the imaginary version of the 1950s that we'd all seen on TV shows all through the 70s. My family dressed like The Cosby Show and watched Family Feud so they could understand what the majority felt about every minor issue. Survey says that my family were mainstream sellouts and I was the black sheep. Or I was trying to be, but they constantly tried to make me normal. I felt like an alien kid left with a boring human family. I didn't love or hate them. I just felt alienated from them. So it came to be Easter, and the week before, my mother was already bugging me about what I was going to wear or whatever. I don't think I even owned a suit at that point, and if I did, it probably didn't fit me anymore. Like I said, I was a rebel. Anyway, my cousin Jed, not his real name, was in town, and he had to leave the day after Easter. I told my mother I would be out camping with Jed the entire weekend and wouldn't be getting home until the evening on Easter. I apologized that I would have to miss the church service that year, and I was surprised at how calm and quiet she was being, just looking at me as I explained what my plans were. But then, when I was done, she grabbed me by my ear, twisted it painfully, and dragged me to my room, where she threw me in. She told me I could come out when I was ready to tell her what I was going to wear to church on Easter Sunday, and slammed the door behind her. All week long, she loudly forbade me from going camping with Jed on the weekend, and wept bitterly that our disrespectful son was going to hell. Thanks, Mom. On Friday, which was Good Friday, Jed and I split while my mother was out someplace and headed off to the forest up near Dick, Michigan. Not the replanted tree farm areas, I mean a little to the south and west, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. Although I do specifically remember walking along Trout Lake Road. I remember that we camped in different places both nights because we were getting harassed right from the get-go, almost as soon as we got there. Okay, so after setting up on Friday night, we built a fire and cooked some food we brought with us, probably hot dogs. You would think we'd be in a good mood, but my mother had really been a jerk all week long, and it was taking a lot to get out from under her negative, superstitious vibe about how I was going to hell if I missed church on Sunday. I had a headache, and Jed seemed pretty annoyed himself. Neither of us had much to say. I was about to ask Jed if anything was new with his family when he shushed me and gestured out toward the woods. He seemed to be listening to something, but I couldn't make it out. I told him it was probably a rabbit and said we should crash. He said we should stay on guard, but that if I needed to sleep, I should go do so. I thanked him for guarding me from all the feral bunnies while I slept and went into the tent, falling asleep very quickly. I woke up at some point in the dark hearing something walking right outside my tent. Definitely sounded like a man walking, not an animal, so I wondered if that were Jed. As I woke up a bit more, I heard the figure sniffing something. That didn't sound like a man's behavior and definitely not Jed's. The only large creature in the woods that I know of which walks is a bear. So the blood just drained from me. I was instantly covered in sweat but shivering at the same time as I realized I was probably about a foot away from a bear. I cried as silently as I could and sniffed quietly, hoping I would live to see the morning. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I remember was the sun coming up and both of us talking about the thing that was in camp the night before. I told Jed the bear was right next to my tent, but Jed just told me it wasn't a bear and that we should hike home so I could make my mother happy by going to church on Easter. I didn't know what he meant when he said it wasn't a bear, but there was no way I was going to church that weekend, so I suggested we hike as far away from home as we could that day and find a second place to camp, some distance from this bear's turf. Jed was okay with that, and I remember we walked up past Dick, Michigan, past all these trees and trees and trees, all planted in straight lines. Eventually, we hit some older growth forest again and settled down for our second night of camping, hoping it would be more peaceful than the first. This would become known between us from then on as the Night of the Werewolf, because I swear to you, that is exactly what we both saw. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, we made camp, but just like the first night, weird feeling hung over the place, and I felt some bizarre kind of guilt for being there. I couldn't relax, and Jed couldn't cheer up. We ate dinner, and I asked Jed if he wanted to tell ghost stories. He asked me back, "Do you?" No, I really didn't. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I regretted being there instead of home. Either way, it was too late. We were here till dawn, and that's all there was to it. This time, we both agreed to take turns standing guard, and I went first because I was too nervous to sleep. As soon as dusk turned to dark, the growling began. First across from me, then to my left, then behind me. They were circling our camp, and they sounded pretty angry. They couldn't possibly be bears. They sounded like big cats sometimes and like big dogs other times. What the hell had I gotten us into? Jed whispered to me to stoke up the fire and then come in his tent with him. He didn't have to ask twice. Somehow, being inside there felt safer than just sitting outside, even though it was as illogical as pulling the blankets up over your face and thinking the boogeyman will go away. These boogeymen did not go away. They stayed till the first rays of dawn, rummaging around the outskirts of our camp. I can say that with assurance because I did not sleep for a second that morning. At the first rays of light, we packed quickly and in silence. There was a weird, unspoken stress under our movements. It was Easter morning. We had to get home in time for church. I was now officially as superstitious as my mother, but so was Jed. Fear of dying can make you superstitious. The dogman was scaring me back into my own tribe. We beat it out of there, and at first we made good time. After about a half hour, I mentioned to Jed how happy I was that we would never have to see those creatures ever again, and then it was so large, and it was so loud. Standing in front of us, the monster was so much impossibly taller than it could possibly have been. It was standing between us and home, between me and my mother. I wondered if I would see her again or if my story was about to end right then and there. My knees wobbled, and I fell to a kneeling position. I couldn't run from this thing, and I couldn't run past it. I was at its mercy, so I closed my eyes, and I prayed. I hadn't prayed since I was a little kid. I had become convinced that prayer was superstition before I was 10 years old. At that moment, I didn't care anymore. Maybe it was a reverting to childhood just before the moment of death. I'm not sure. All I know is I prayed, and I apologized for not listening to my mother, and I prayed that she would be strong enough to get by without me. I prayed and I prayed, expecting to face death at any second. After some time, it dawned on me that I was not dead yet. Cautiously, I opened my eyes and found nothing. Well, No monster, anyways. Jed was next to me, laying on the dirt. He was breathing heavily, so I knew he wasn't dead. We were both still alive. Trembling all over, I tried to wake him, but couldn't. I tried to stand, but couldn't do that either. I leaned against a tree and cried, waiting for Jed to wake up. Eventually he did, and we made the rest of the trek home. We showered and got dressed in our least decrepit outfits before Mom was up, so we started making breakfast. We must have looked horrible, but at least we were clean-shaven. Mom was happy and relieved to see us, although she never said as much. She acted like she knew we would be there in time. That was good enough for us. I never told my mom the story of what happened that day, but it was almost as if she knew anyway somehow. We had a different way of talking to each other after that. She didn't try to tell me how to behave anymore, and I saw less reason to disrespect her feelings. So, now, the big question everyone always asks, is Dogman evil? Hell yes. But did he do evil in my life? No. In fact, his appearance in my life was probably a good thing. But then again, I'm one of the ones that got away. I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279. Scared Off by Werewolves, as told to Peter Bernard. Read by PQ River. So when I was a kid, we had a crazy aunt named Crazy Aunt Dottie. We used to call her Dottie Aunt Crazy behind her back. She wore thick glasses that made her eyes look giant. She couldn't hear too well, and her attention span was fairly short. Oh, and the thing about Aunt Dottie that earned her the cruel nickname Crazy. Aunt Dottie was convinced that the land around her property was haunted by werewolves. Dottie's house was the only inhabited one on her block, which was carved out of an old-growth forest. She told us that when she and her late husband moved in, when she was a 20-year-old bride, this was going to be the first block in a proposed new neighborhood. Houses only ended up being built on about half of the plots of this block, and all of them had clearly been abandoned long before I was born. I remember the historic moment when we asked Aunt Dottie where all the other people on the block had gone. "Oh, the werewolves scared them all off," she replied innocently, and we all had to stifle laughter. Remember I said it was a historic moment? That's because this became a running joke in my family from then on. Where's the TV guide? The werewolves scared it off. Have you seen the car keys? Nope. The werewolves scared them off. And so on. So, now you think we were cruel. We never said any of this to her face. Then, one day, in 2008, Aunt Dottie died. I was stunned to discover she was 95 years old. Apparently, Aunt Dottie had lived in that house since 1933 and had been alone since my late Uncle Grant died in the mid-50s. She got Social Security and lived mostly off that. My sister estimated what the property would be worth, which was not really that much. We still figured to make a bit of a profit off selling the place, so we were eager to do so at the earliest possible moment. The trouble was, the few local realtors were all entirely uninterested in even listing the places for sale, and none of them would explain why. I could guess why. It was the stupid myth that the place was infested with werewolves. Imagine, infested with movie monsters in the 21st century. So finally, an idea dawned on me to use the then relatively new website called YouTube to try to correct this situation. I decided to spend the night in the house with my trusty old VHS camera and prove that there were no werewolves in the location so that I could sell the place and buy myself a bag of nacho cheese-flavored Doritos. Simple, right? Except, of course, didn't work out as planned. I got to the place and set up my camera on a tripod, facing out the back window. Okay, mistake number one. This camera had no night vision. I had no idea what I was doing. About the only things I could see in the video were occasional bugs flying close to the lens or else reflections of me from inside the house. Since I didn't think the video was going to prove or disprove anything to anybody, I started recording myself monologuing cheerily about how fun it was there in the house and how there were no werewolves here. That's when I was interrupted by the sound of dogs. Howling. Actually, I wasn't sure they were dogs. It might have been coyotes or even wolves. They were right in the woods after all. To be honest, I would prefer to come upon a pack of coyotes or wolves than a pack of stray dogs. Former house pets who have gone feral are the most frightening creatures in the world, with the possible exception of the things that were making those terrible sounds outside my late aunt's house that night. They weren't the howls of dogs, coyotes, or wolves. You know what was outside that house, and I knew it too? It was a terrifying sound, and I immediately wanted to get out of there. But I had come this far, and besides, there's no such thing as a werewolf. I just had to wait till this pack of dogs moved on. Then the rest of the night would be peaceful, and I'd be able to videotape something and sell this place. Patience is a virtue, I told myself. And so I sat there, camera off, waiting for the dogs to stop their racket outside. And so, of course, they just went on and on and on and on, and they sounded closer, closer and closer. Catching a flash out of the corner of my right eye, I turned quickly to see the most terrifying thing I ever saw in my life. This was a man standing outside the window, staring at me with wild eyes. He was unclothed and covered in fur. He had ears that I at first took to be like elf ears or Spock ears, but when he shifted weight on his strange bull-like legs, I could see his ears were on top, like those of a bull or a deer or a dog. He appeared to be mentally challenged as his tongue hung down out of his mouth, panting and drooling. His eyes, though, were intense and alert. I heard a growling sound and watched as this man-thing curled his lip up and bore his fangs at me. Those teeth looked like they were used to tearing flesh off living creatures. There was only one thin sheet of glass between me and this monster, and I understood all at once that Aunt Dottie wasn't crazy at all. I realized with crushing weight how pompous and cruel we all were, assuming we knew better than our brave old aunt. She lived here for 7 decades. Who could do that? I promised myself that if I lived till the morning, I would never come back there again. The dog-headed man-creature showed me the claws on its front paws, which were shaped much like human hands. He laid the claws gently against the glass, then drew them down the pane, leaving 4 evenly spaced scratches on the window. He was marking this house as his turf. I was intruding on his turf. I guess this monster thing was the only real estate person in the area who mattered. I turned on the camera, and the creature moved away from the window so quickly I wasn't sure which direction he had headed in. By the time the image came on, he was long gone. So there I was, informed that I was on a monster's turf, but if I were to leave the house to try to get in my car and go, I'd be exposing myself to getting eaten by the big bad wolf. What would you do? Probably the same thing I did. which was to lock myself up in my aunt's room on the second floor. The rest of the night, I tried to sleep, but I could hear them outside, moving around, racing around. It seemed to me that every time I was about to fall asleep, one of them would hit into the house hard and wake me back up again. I remember hearing a scratching sound on the outside of the house, and I sat up in terror. Was one of them climbing the outside of the house? Was it climbing up to the second floor to get me? I heard nothing more for a few minutes and began to calm down when I heard it again. I watched the window intently from the bed, too afraid to get up and look out. But eventually morning came, and I got up the nerve to look outside. Looked like nothing happened. In the morning light, it felt like maybe nothing really had. Going downstairs, the scratches on the window were still there, and the previous night-long nightmare was proven to have definitely happened. I got in my car and drove out of there, grateful to be alive and never to have to return. We gave up any hope of selling the property and left it for the Dogman. Peter Bernard asked me if I think what I saw was a natural animal or something evil and supernatural. All I know for sure is this. Dogman is an annoying SOB, and he cost my family a whole bunch of money.
The Easter Hidebehind, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. I'm the mom of 2 young children, a boy age 6 and a girl age 4. But this is a story about when my mom was a kid, back in the 1970s. It all got started because of my boy and girl watching some TV cartoon show on one of the Disney channels, I think. They had a character on the show called the Hidebehind that sort of freaked my mother out. At first, I laughed at the way she was acting, but I could see it wasn't funny to her. I asked what was wrong, but she didn't want to talk about it. All I could tell was that she was very surprised and unhappy, and somehow it had to do with this character on TV. After we had put the kids to bed that night, she told me the story that explained her reaction. Back in the 70s, my mother lived in a part of upstate New York where people used to let their kids walk alone to school or church, sometimes for miles and miles. She told me her generation was the last to do it, though. It started becoming controversial right about then, as the public grew more educated about child safety. But during that era, plenty of kids were still sent off walking alone. My mom said that she was 9 years old and her sister, Emma, was 7 the year this happened. Back then, her dad used to tell her that as long as she knew how to protect herself and her sister from the Hidebehind, then she'd be fine walking alone, even through the forest. But back then, the Hidebehind wasn't any cartoon, and it wasn't supposed to look anything like that character. The Hidebehind was a boogeyman. It was tall, hairy, and very strong. He would hide behind trees and wait for the perfect chance to catch you from behind. The Hidebehind would never attack from the front. In fact, if it ever noticed that you could see it, then it would act friendly or shy and just go away. The Hidebehind was skinny enough to hide behind any tree, so he didn't need to eat much. That's why legend said that sometimes he could wait for years and years, waiting for just the right person to sneak up behind and kidnap. Then that person would never be heard from again. I asked my mom how any creature could go years and years between meals, but she said she was just telling it to me the way Grandma and Grandpa told it to her. I admitted that it is interesting how the behavior of the Hidebehind is so similar to the way people say Bigfoot behaves, hiding behind trees and peeking around, looking at humans. Then, if they are discovered, they tend to just walk away. which has led some to assume that Bigfoot means us no harm. Maybe they were just walking away because we had caught them before they could pull their planned kidnapping on us. What if the reason we haven't found definitive proof of Bigfoot is because all this time they've been hunting us as a food source? Or something even worse? Now it was my mom's turn to laugh at me. She said I sure could fly down conspiracy theory avenue based on a few words of folklore. I pointed out I wasn't the one who looked like I was going to faint over a TV cartoon character, and she got serious all over again. Well, that wasn't all there was to it, she went on, unsure of herself. I think it used to stalk us when we were kids. Me and Emma, I mean. I brewed some coffee, and we sat down together, and she told me everything she could remember. I'll try to sum it up into a story here for you. Basically, each Sunday, her mom and dad would either get into an argument or oversleep, and the girls would ask permission to start walking to church on their own. They'd save space in a pew, and Grandma and Grandpa would catch up to them later, usually just as the service was about to start. At first, it had been fun walking alone, hand in hand with Emma. Finally, she felt like a grown-up in charge of the situation, and she liked getting to boss her younger sister around too. But for the last few weeks in March and early April, every time they passed along this one patch of forest, it sure did sound like someone or something large was following along with them past the tree line. On Palm Sunday, Mom said she made a point of stopping before entering that area, and both girls deliberately walked slowly and quietly down the center of the dirt road. With dense forest closing in on both the left and right, she said that this time, instead of the crashing in the bushes she had heard the last 2 or 3 times, everything was very, very quiet. At one point, my mom says she got a strange feeling and turned around as fast as she could. For a split second, she says she saw the face of a very tall man making brief eye contact, then quickly ducking behind a tree. She says she screamed, which made her sister scream as well. Then they grabbed each other's hands and ran the rest of the way to church, screaming the entire time. Once they arrived there, several of the adults scolded them for shouting. When they explained what had happened, they got scolded for making up stories. Just then, their parents arrived, brought them inside, and the service began. All that week, the girls tried over and over to tell their parents about the Hidebehind. At first, both humored them, saying things like, "That's what you get for not respecting the area the Hidebehind lives in." But after a couple of days, both parents lectured them separately that they were taking these stories too far, and that there really was no such thing as a Hidebehind. Mom and sister decided between themselves that no matter how late they were to church, that they would never walk by themselves to church again, not as long as it meant walking through that stretch of forest. The next Sunday was Easter, and both girls got ready early. They liked Easter and were attending an egg hunt after church. As usual, their parents started arguing. My mother says she tried to get them to be nice, which only caused both of them to yell at her simultaneously and order her and her sister to head off to church by themselves again. "Oh no, not on Easter," cried her little sister, who then began openly weeping. "Get out of here before I give you a reason to cry," bellowed Grandpa, according to my mother. So off to the church alone they once again went, Emma crying the entire way. Eventually they reached the beginning of the patch of woods, and Emma was shaking all over. She was trying to stop crying, She didn't want to make much noise when she was near those woods. "We're going to die," my mom says her little sister told her. "No, we're not," Mom said as confidently as she could. "You walk to church same as always, and I'll walk backwards behind you. If I keep an eye out for the hide-behind, he can't come and get you, right?" Emma's crying leveled off and stopped. The plan made enough sense to her. So Mom says she faced Emma in the direction of the church, and she stood back to back with her. At first they tried holding hands, but Emma said it hurt her shoulder socket, so they just started walking as back to back as they could manage. "Warn me of rocks so I don't trip," Mom says she asked her sister, who agreed in a shaky voice. Mom kept asking Emma to go slower, and she did try. They had made it more than halfway through without seeing or hearing anything. Mom says she was starting to calm down, but Emma's breathing was getting more and more nervous. Then, suddenly, she saw it. A big, big man covered in dark hair was staring at her from behind a tree, maybe 100 feet away. Seeing her looking at him, the man came out and walked onto the road that the girls were on. "What is that sound?" Emma asked. "Don't turn around," my mother says she ordered. The tall man continued walking across the road and disappeared quickly behind some bushes. "Keep walking, Emma, everything's fine," she said blandly, while trying not to faint. So they walked slowly, Emma forward and my mom backward. Soon, my mom says she saw another face on the opposite side of the road. This one only about as high off the ground as her own. "A baby!" she gasped. "What?" Emma asked. Just then, the baby face rose up and up and up until it was even further off the ground than the face of the previous giant man. This fellow also crossed the road and disappeared into the forest in a non-threatening manner. "It's nothing, Emma. Just keep walking," my mom said as calmly as she could. "You're not missing anything." The rest of the walk passed uneventfully, but once they got to church, Emma started bawling so hard that all the adults gathered around. By the time my grandparents arrived, the entire neighborhood was scolding them for making such young girls walk alone through the forest when it frightened them. As badly as my mom and her sister had been scolded the week before, their mom and dad received it twice as bad on Easter morning. Mom says Edith Brickle even offered to personally drive the girls to church, which shamed my grandparents into never letting this happen again. So, my mom told me, we never saw the hide-behind again, and I kind of put it out of my head. But hearing people make a joke about it on a kid's show? Her voice trailed off. "Did it offend you?" I asked. No. I'm not one of those shrinking violets who needs to be protected from joking around," she replied angrily. "If people want to make jokes, let them do it. All I know is the hide-behind is not funny to me, and it never will be." The next time my mom came to spend the night, I had her give my kids a special class in how to survive a walk through the woods if you're being hunted by a hide-behind. I think it's information every kid should be taught.
Strange Springtime Discovery, as told to Peter Bernard, read by P.Q. River. Dear Scary Stories, I want to tell you a story that has cost me a few of my friends. They say it's evidence I need to check myself into a mental home. When I wrote about this on Facebook, it got over 100 likes, but a large portion of the comments people left were somewhat rude. Don't go looking for that post now, as I have deleted it and deactivated my account due to the harshness of the ridicule I received. If you're going to tell me I'm crazy, or that I'm making this up, you'll be telling me things I have already heard over and over, so please don't mind me if I ignore those type of comments. I also ask that you please hear me out and listen all the way through to the end of what I have to say before you judge me. Now, here's what happened. I found the body of Mithras in the forest behind my home in Massachusetts, and I buried him. Well, at least it told me it was Mithras. Other times it told me it was Horus. I could tell that it was a god of some sort, though, because of its size, and also the way it was speaking to me inside my head. Most people can't even speak in your head when they're alive, so I figure if something can do something like that when they're dead, they must be a god, or as Giorgio Tsoukalos would say, an ancient alien. Okay, now that almost everyone has turned this off or stopped reading, I'll tell you the rest of the story. It all started when me and my dog Mike were out roaming in the woods like we did every Friday afternoon when I would get back from work. My office was letting us out on noon on Fridays back then. It's a long story. They don't anymore, but I'm in a different department now anyway. It was early spring and only some of the trees had buds on them. Things were starting to get green again, and here and there flowers were starting to poke their heads up and give the place that smell that only comes that time of year. Mike started chasing a rabbit, and I was running after him, trying not to lose sight. After a while, neither of us could see where the rabbit went, and Mike ran in a circle around me, smelling the ground and the air in a confused manner. That's when I first heard the voice. I wasn't really sure if it was speaking English or what, but I understood what it was saying. It was calling me by my name, or actually by my middle name, Dwan, which was what my mother wanted my name to be. She had to settle for making it my middle name because my father wanted me to be named after his rich uncle, who ended up dying and not leaving us a cent anyway. The voice called me by the name my mother named me. The voice told me to come find it. Mike and I wandered the rest of the day, and then just before we were about to turn back, we found the god laying dead on the forest floor. It was so tall, there was no way it was not a god. It had to be 12 feet, maybe 13, just laying there, decomposing. I wonder what it had looked like in life besides large. Much of the flesh was already eaten away. The eyes were long gone. Mike whimpered and wouldn't come near. "Bury me," the voice said. "I'll get a shovel and come back in the morning," I said out loud to the body. "No," the voice said. "You must use your hands. You must do it now." Then it began chanting in words I did not understand. I realized that it must have been speaking English to me earlier, because I understood it then, but did not understand it now. And it chanted something that sounded like a prayer. Anek brak, neferempi, anek brak. Long after dark that night, I dug into the soft earth with my hands. I dug a shallow grave right next to it, from the body's head down to the body's feet. The hole was probably only a foot deep in the deepest places, far less than in some areas. I was growing exhausted, and the night was becoming colder. Poor Mike was miserable and terrified. "Enough," said the voice in my head. "Now pick me up and place me in the earth." I was dizzy and tired. I knew what he asked made no sense, but I wrapped my arms around the rotting, horrible-smelling corpse as though to pick it up. As I stood, I discovered I was holding nothing but a seed, the like of which I had never seen before. Reality seemed like one continuous morph, yet felt face-slappingly real at the same time. My stomach boiled and made weird indigestion sounds, and I realized my hand was shaking. It was hard to look at the seed with my hand shaking like that.
Throw me into the ground. Allow me to die and be reborn.
I dropped the seed, and it dug itself underground. I heard and felt it doing so. I felt the voice was gone and immediately began jogging away from there, anxious for the disorienting event to be over. It was already dark, and we shouldn't be out there alone at this time of night without any sort of weapon. Mike was excited as I began my walk home, grateful to be returning to safety. What a day for such a small dog to have. That Sunday was Easter morning, and right after dawn there was a terrible noise in the woods. I don't even want to describe what it sounded like I was listening to. There must be a bear in the area, I thought, and loaded my shotgun. Mike began whining and tried to get me to go to the bedroom where he felt safe. I decided to surf the internet on my iPad for a while on my enclosed porch, which had large windows that gave a clear view of the forest in the direction the horrific noise just occurred in. I figured I'd keep a peripheral eye on the woods for a while, just in case. About a half hour later, I heard something else inexplicable out there. The chances of a second predator in the area terrified me, and I now sat up at attention for the better part of the next hour, scanning the tree line with the scope on my rifle, looking for anything even slightly out of the ordinary. Then I heard it. I heard the voice. I heard the voice, only this time it wasn't coming from my head. This time it came from the woods. It said things I didn't understand, like,
Nihes, Nihes, Nihes.
It said my name again, the name my mother gave me. Then it said,
I'm hungry. Feed me.
I heard trees parting, then saw the thing coming out of the forest. It was entirely covered in hair, and it was taller, much taller than the body old Mike and I had seen. It was the most surreal thing I have ever witnessed or ever hoped to see. The huge thing sat down, cross-legged in my backyard, looked at me, and repeated,
I'm hungry. Feed me.
I prepared all the food in my house, one meal at a time, and fed the giant horror. I imagined the lecture my late mother would be giving about how it must be Satan because it mocks the Lord by returning to life on Easter. My poor mother, God rest her soul, never knew that there were things older than Satan. Could this thing be what it said it was? If not, what was it? After each meal, it informed me it was still hungry. It was only hours before all my food was gone, and when it was, I told it so. I asked it if I should go into the town and get more food. There was silence for a while as this huge man-like God thing and I regarded one another. In the evening sun, its hair looked much greener than it had earlier. I wondered what it was, really. It had given me 2 names already, but how many more could it give? I asked in my mind, what are you really? The thing made an expression at me as though it felt disrespected. I suddenly remembered that it was hungry, and a flash of adrenaline fear shot through me like lightning. Its expression changed to an unknowable one, and it began to rise to its full height. The higher it stood, the more my stomach hurt, and I felt like I was going to be sick right there. I was glad that Mike was hiding, as I had to crane my neck backwards to continue to look at its face. It became very apparent that this creature-like thing could have me as the next course in his meal without extending much effort. I heard it emit a low growl, or I felt it in my belly and the soles of my feet. This was an animal and a god, yet it was neither, and a mockery of both, and now it was going to kill me. Except it didn't. It turned and walked back into the forest and was gone. I haven't seen it again. But every springtime since then, I leave food out in the forest, I put it out pretty deep in the woods, further than old Mike is ever likely to go. To this day, I don't know what that thing really was or is. Was it the embodiment of spring? Was it some sort of earth spirit or elemental? Was it a troll, a giant? Or was it a god form called various names by various cultures over dozens of centuries? Although a layman, I consider myself a man of science, and science limits itself to the bare facts. The one thing I can state unequivocally about this entity as an undeniable scientific fact is that when it wakes up hungry.
And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.